As long as we don't break this secret false coding within us, by coding I mean a certain inner programming which makes us believe that we are something, while the reality is we are something else. When there is ignorance and some misconception about one's identity, no matter what books we refer to, what law books, Niti Shastra, Smriti, etc. we refer to, right action either will not just take place, or while we are conforming to well-specified norms of right action, it will lack the touch of true quality, and it will disrupt, it will destroy. So one sentence to summarize in advance this evening's talk is: right action springs forth spontaneously from the ground of selflessness. So let's go into this, how it is so and how we can arrive at that ground. Incidentally, this evening's theme is the most popular theme, most common theme in the so-called scriptural literature around the world in all traditions. In the Bhagavad Gita, we have countless instances of Sri Krishna talking about karma. Karma is action. And Lord Krishna himself says that it is very complex topic. Many of you would be familiar with Sri Krishna saying in the 4th chapter, 16th verse, Kim karma kima karmeti kavayopyatra mohitah tatte karma pravakshyami yajnatva mokshase ashubhat. Even learned people, kavayaha, mohitaha, are deluded with respect to what is action and what is inaction. This theme of action is indeed very deep. Therefore, Arjuna, I shall tell you exactly what is action, and the implication thereof is what is right action. The Lord himself says, Gahana karmano gatihi. Gahana means very deep, inscrutable. Hardly anyone is able to figure out the details of right action. He says in the very next verse, namely 17th, in the 4th chapter, Karmano hyapi bodhavyam bodhavyancha vikarmanaha akarmanascha bodhavyam gahana karmano gatihi. O Arjuna, we ought to know what is right action, what is wrong action, and what is inaction. And by implication, as per great commentators, Lord Krishna is also pointing to what is transcendence of action. There being a word naishkarmya in the Gita elsewhere. And transcendence is not literally not doing. Transcendence is whether you do or not, you enjoy deep in you a serenity. It is like finding leisure amidst activity, where you relax in work, All the workaholics might be very happy. That's what we do, Swamiji. But rather than our folks appreciating it, they criticize us. Please dwell on it and give us a Christmas gift. That workaholism is the teaching of the Gita. Oh, I cannot do that. We are not talking of workaholism in which people sort of experience a certain joy, pleasure, they are absorbed in it, they go on, and rather than giving you the gift of endorsing it and saying it is Gita's teaching, bear with me, I would rather say workaholism is often, if not at all times, an escape. One is escaping, one is not willing to face the whole of life. There was somebody working on, and when her colleague said to her, "Why don't you go home? It is so late." "I don't want to go home." "What's wrong?" "I don't feel at home when I go home." So one is avoiding home, let us say, and I am no judge. You find out whether it is really love of work or some kind of avoidance, that actually happens. By the way, it is not irrelevant to mention here that in right action there is no form of escapism. On the contrary, in right action there is actual and full meeting with life. Escapism is to have some comfort in sort of some kind of emotions or thoughts, some kind of absorption, and for a good length of time we just do not think about other challenges of life. Many people try to avoid loneliness through more and more work. Then it cannot be right action. They don't know how to face themselves. So if I work, if I get down to some activity, because without that activity I cannot face myself, I don't know how to handle myself. My greatest challenge is me myself. So I just grab some work. Give me something to do. Challenge me. In this way, then there is a problem. So action should not be an escape. Action should not be a way to shut our eyes to something else. Action should be truly necessary, truly spontaneous. It should, in other words, rise from one's heart, not so much from the head. All beauty comes from one's heart. Spiritual perfection is when one is in good touch with one's own heart. It is in our heart that, in a manner of saying, God whispers. God speaks to us not so much in any corner of our head as He does in our heart. When we look into our heart, we know where we are escaping, where we are meeting with life, where we are truly loving, and where we are bluffing. The heart keeps the most secret documents. The head keeps calculated and manipulated documents. Both are available in human life typically. So if you want to cleanse up your own system, you want to thoroughly debug, thoroughly run an antivirus program and clean the system up, then look into your heart. There begins a great inner journey. Therefore, we say, Gahana karmano gatihi, deep and inscrutable are the ways of action. One ought to know action, inaction, wrong action, and transcendence of action. And it is here in this very portion of the spiritual classic that Bhagavad Gita is, that Sri Krishna says something apparently self-contradictory, which has the distinct flavor of Upanishads. The 18th verse goes, Karmanyakarmaya pashyet akarmani cha karmayaha sabuddhiman manushyeshu sayukta kritsna karmakrit. One who sees action in inaction and inaction in action is the wisest of all. This is a very puzzling statement. One who sees action in inaction and inaction in action is the wisest. And when one has this vision, one enjoys a certain inner well-being, which is like as though one has done all that one needs to do in life. Kritsna karma krit. A supreme fulfillment. So what are these puzzlesome lines here? What is meant by action in inaction and inaction in action? The key is when we believe that it is an outside-in approach. I find out from somewhere the best law book, the best moral guide, what someone has said, what someone has laid down. No matter how sincere I am, while that sincerity deserves appreciation, alas, one is not really into right action. At best, it is a decent approximation. And probably, I agree, I concede, it reduces guilt, it reduces shame, it reduces various inner conflicts when you go by the law. Manusmriti or Bhagavad Gita, Bible or Quran, Dhammapada, some book or some code that you have received. And in fact, in the 16th chapter, Lord Krishna himself says, you ought to follow the Shastra, which is the guide in deciding what is to be done and what is not to be done. Tasmat Shastram Pramanam Te Karya Akarya Vyavastitau Jnatva Shastra Vidhanoktam Karma Kartumiharhasi is the last shloka, last verse of chapter 16. After laying down some arguments, Sri Krishna himself concedes. In view of all this, look, Arjuna, scriptures are the guidebook. By studying scriptures, you will know what is the thing to be done and what to avoid. However, the spiritual wisdom is such that it comes to us on different planes. When someone is not able to make head or tail of this inner cleansing and being free of ego and acting in the moment and meeting with a situation with fullness, living in supreme mindfulness or alertness, when someone does not figure out what this is, then no wonder that these seers, these masters advise going by the book. The greatest book, however, is to be found in your heart. But how many of us are able to listen to the whispers in our heart? When so many Rajasic and Tamasic tendencies rise, what we call aggressive, assertive, self-seeking tendencies rise with great force in us, to say, listen to the voice of your conscience. Get a feel of how you are operating. Are you operating with a picture of division, or are you operating from a certain intuitive grasp of oneness, etc.? These questions fall flat before any of us when the mind is rather gross. Therefore, a lot of places, classics like Bhagavad Gita, tell us the outside-in approach. See what is said here. The famous line of Manusmriti is often quoted by all devout Hindus. Vedokhilam dharma moolam smriti shile cha tadvidam. How do we know our duty in life? What is right to do? Vedas are the source, said the rishis of the land of India, in that glorious culture which for thousands of years was thriving, was attracting everybody from all over the globe. India was drawing everyone, Columbus, and that's history. Everybody wanted to reach India. And that India at that time had very advanced intellectual activity in the worldly sense as well as in spirituality. The Upanishads are thousands of years old. Smritis, countless Sanskrit works, many of them lost. Some Sanskrit works, they say, are found today in some libraries in Germany, and India does not have them. And in the material plane too. They had metallurgy, they had all those sciences. And you know very well, Vatsyayana's Kama Sutras are even today recognized as one of the all-time classics in the pursuit of pleasure. So, in that country, on the soil of India, there were these books, and Manusmriti tried to summarize things. Today Manusmriti is a very controversial book, for it talks of caste, it talks of all levels and divisions. Let's not go into that. But that was a source, that was a manual for the community. It is no more the guidebook for majority, though some ultra-orthodox people even today worship the Manusmriti. But this stanza, Vedokhilam dharma moolam smriti shile cha tadvidam, and there is a second half to that shloka which I do not remember. The first source for finding right action is the Vedas, and if you don't find answer to your doubt, to your conflict, then go for the Smriti, what learned people who have studied the Vedas, reworded it all, put that wisdom again in the form of various works. And then Shila, Smriti Shila. If you don't find answer either in the Veda or these other books, then go for examples, conduct of learned people. Learn from that. And the fourth one to appear in the second half of that celebrated verse says, when these three fail, as the fourth option, go by your conscience, Atma Santushti. And the orthodoxy harps on this. Even today, the orthodoxy would go to any length saying, look, you people, they criticize speakers like me also, are making everything topsy-turvy. You seem to be giving the message to people that Atma Santushti, listening to the voice of the conscience, is the first source, and the Vedas, the scriptures are left behind, etc. But not really so. In fact, today, try if you like, study the Vedas, see if you can get answers to various problems. Very hard indeed to find. Though general guidance is available, inspiring pointers are available, but Vedas do not touch a whole lot of specific issues. The Smritis are heavily written in the language that applies to the society of 2000 years ago. And the conduct of rishis or munis or various great souls, again, many times fall short of telling you what you may do. For you find my life is so different. And what is more, in this today's world, when we are exposed to many cultures, we are exposed to many traditions, when on our right side the neighbor has a certain belief system, on the left the other neighbor has some other belief system, and especially for the younger generation, there is a big gap between these source books and their own actual life. What speakers like me do is absolutely not any kind of playing with the traditional wisdom. Rather, it is an honest attempt to get at the essence of the traditional wisdom. I may make one more remark before throwing light on the central theme. The scriptures that are highly revered today, Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads, let us say, in the Hindu scenario, very scarcely touch specific topics. Once somebody asked me, Swamiji, urgently tell me which shloka in Bhagavad Gita touches on smoking. Bhagavad Gita does not talk on smoking. It doesn't touch specific topics like, let us say, meat eating. It does not touch on, of course, the most recent issues, abortion or surrogate mother or homosexuality, etc., are not touched. Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads either talk in a very universal language. They talk of truthfulness, straightforwardness, cleanliness, purity of motives. They talk of respect for each other. Maybe slightly they touch respect for elders and learned people. They talk of vision of oneness. They talk of these values. Take a look at the list of values that the Gita does. You find they are very inspiring, but they don't come to very, very specific, concrete scenarios that you and I meet with. And there is a reason why Bhagavad Gita would not do it. For Lord Krishna and all those seers knew that virtue, morality, whether you like it or not, cannot be defined in those concrete details. So it's not that they cleverly avoided, but they saw clearly that the truth of the virtue, truth of morality is not in the details. It is something inside us. If you go to the Upanishads, you find they do not make much mention of values too. There is a passing mention. Kathopanishad, for example, has a lot of description of a person of right values, and there is the description of the chariot, and the chariot body is the chariot, the sense organs are the horses, sense objects are the roads, our intellect is the driver, one who gives direction to the chariot, And the Kathopanishad, a high-end classic of the spirituality in India, talks about going on the path of the good and avoiding the path of the pleasant. Don't fall for pleasure, see what is good and choose the good. But many Upanishads do not touch on values so much. The Upanishads talk of transcendence, and you are in trouble. You look into Upanishads, that person maybe, after not getting a reply from me about what shloka refers to smoking, caught hold of Kathopanishad. Let me see myself. Ishopanishad, Kenopanishad. Nowhere there would be these specific issues. Instead, it would go to the other extreme. It would say, the sense of doership is false. And you say, my God, where am I? Ramana Maharshi was asked about the bondage of action. See, action causes stress, action causes guilt and shame or pride, and action has its psychological results. When we act, if it is good, we have a certain sense of well-being. My day went well today, we say, don't we? And when we do so-called wrong things, contrary to what we believe as right, already we shrink inside. And this inner swelling and shrinking has been called bandhana. And when they asked Sri Maharshi, how are we to handle this endless struggle of karma and karma phala, work and work's results? True to the Upanishadic spirit, he pulls the carpet below your feet. There is a shloka in Saddarshanam, 40 verses on reality. Karomi karmeti naro vijanan badhyo bhavet karma phalancha bhoktum vichara dhuta hradi kartrata chet karmatrayam nashyati saiva muktihi. What it means is, look, you are asking me how you may be free from the clutches of action, right action, wrong action, results, good results, bad results, and all that. But basically you need to examine who is acting, who is working. And if you go into the issue, who it is in me that is working, that has to do right action, etc., you find vichara dhuta, the sense of I vanishes into thin air, and there is no bondage. This again could be very disappointing to us. We want some concrete answer. We are very impatient. Tell us, and preferably give us the answer which suits our convenience. Tell me, can I eat that? And if you say, I want to eat something, and you say, you can, thank you very much. I find you are a very practical person. Can I marry him? Can I move to East Coast? Can I return to India? And in your heart you want a, let us say, answer as no. In some cases it could be no. And the Guru says, no, never do that. Stay here, don't go back to India. Swamiji, I never saw such clarity in any other Guru. Be careful. So ready answers might many times be very pleasing, but to do justice to the whole matter, we need to go into the depths of the issue. And the Gita and Upanishads, etc., do not go into a lot of details, because in details there is injustice to the theme, for life has such variety, the parameters are so many. So they give general guidance, and the ultimate solution and arriving at right action unmistakably is when something transforms deep within. In a very poetic language, Sri Krishna has this to say in the Bhagavad Gita, in that very portion which I started with, 4th chapter, verse 19, a very wonderful way of putting things. Yasya sarve samarambah kama sankalpa varjitah jnanagni dagdha karmanam tamahu panditam buddhah. One in whose case all one's actions are burnt by the fire of knowledge. He is truly wise. Such a person has every action springing forth from her without a trace of selfishness in it. Kama sankalpa varjitaha samarambah. So is Sri Krishna describing action or the ground from where action rises? You will see clearly that he is touching on the ground. He is touching on the source. He is asking us, look within, be aware of what you are, what you think you are. This is an inside-out approach. At other places he concedes, go by the law, be a law-abiding citizen. We have explained it before. Yes, that is a wonderful advice when the higher teachings do not make sense. So traditionally we have always talked about adhikara, certain eligibility. When one doesn't know, like here you have an idiom, play it by the ear. And you are telling someone to play it by the ear when that person does not have good ears, let us say. Then what do? You know that this person cannot play it by the ear. Then you say, I am telling you, just do this. And then you quietly take responsibility for if anything goes wrong. And in your heart you wish, if I had a person who would play it by the ear and do the right thing at the right time. Leave alone these moral issues, spiritual issues, all these philosophical and religious issues. Isn't it true that in a whole lot of mundane situations, one requires a sixth sense? Generally we say one requires a sixth sense to make profit. But here I am saying one requires a sixth sense, maybe a seventh sense, to come upon what is good for the employees and the employers, the customers and the company, what is good for all. Ethical management is a word that nowadays people use. Ethical management based on global values. All such wonderful language is coming up and I am happy. I take to those things like duck taking to water when I get those, because yes, this is a rewording of the old wisdom. Ethical management with global values and so on. What actually does it mean? It means a very broad understanding. Global values. And what is ethical management? That has great depth. Management for profit. Winning is the only thing, and all those things. They are shallow, though they appeal to a lot of people. Winning is not everything, but it is the only thing. Wow, when people, get excited. But then, those are all passing pleasures. One wins, and someone like Stephen Covey would say, one apparently wins and one scores a point over the other, but stands victorious over the debris of spoiled relationships. In his 7 habits, he has made such a expression. When there is no proper consideration to values, one is just focused on, scoring in a particular situation. All I want is to win in this game. Beg, borrow or steal or by hook or crook and all this. We have no shortage of language there. But what is the result? You won. But on the whole, there are the debris of spoiled relationships between individuals or between countries or whatever. There is a damage to a subtler dimension in oneself. So, what is the meaning of this very poetic expression? One whose actions are burnt in the fire of understanding. Jnanagni dagdha karma. This calls for a deeper and broader understanding of life, and it puts the whole situation upside down. And we may not like it first. For once more I would say, we feel there is an evasiveness in this approach, or we say it is rather abstract. But please bear with these thinkers. Rather than it being abstract or high or evasive, it is gently making an appeal to you to come to the core. When you are right action flows from you. When deep inside you are wrong, you are selfish or egoistic, deep inside there is a complex in you, deep inside there is an insecurity in you, deep inside you are carrying a hurt over several years or pulling on with an attachment, then alas, right action cannot come forth. Sri Ramakrishna in a related context said, if you have just eaten some garlic, just now you have eaten a little bit of garlic, then every word you speak comes out with the smell of garlic. We are not for or against garlic, we are illustrating a certain point where I have eaten garlic and my breath carries the smell of garlic. In the same way, in my heart I have some hurt. In my heart I have some pride. In my heart I have a tendency to prove to people that I am a decent fellow. Whether they questioned it or not is a different thing. But my mind talks to myself. So, in the depth of my heart, suppose I am carrying all this confusion, then can any book, however good it may be, guide me to right action properly? Probably I would have the best guidance, but at the moment when action is demanded from me, I will fail. I won't do it. It is like the story of a certain person who had been coached and who had claimed also, if anybody breaks open our door and comes in, I have a revolver right below my pillow. And he even had demonstrated sort of to people how he will take it immediately, how he will stand up and shoot that intruder. He was living in a farmhouse far away from the town and all that. And one night an intruder did come. An intruder came, broke open and came inside, and the intruder did not have any weapon. Intruder did not say anything, but this man jumped out of his bed and without being asked also lifted his hands and said, take whatever you want but don't touch me. The revolver is below, and he had rehearsed, he had told everyone what he would do, case 1, case 2, if he enters from here, this is what I shall do, if he enters from there, this is what I shall do, and your role will be this and her role will be this. Everything had been set up. And if you permit me to indulge in a little humor, the intruder said, all I wanted is a glass of water. Oh, I see. Yeah, no. He was not a robber. Don't ask me for details. This is cooked very fresh, this story. Okay, so there is this issue as another example of using science and technology for peaceful purposes. Science and technology are a double-edged sword. We could use it to destroy all humanity, or you could use it for bringing peace and prosperity and all that. Suppose you are, and most of you are, scientists, technologists. You have access to these tools of destruction or tools of so much good. It is one thing, please see, to make a table. These are the good uses, these are the destructive uses, and periodically, let us say, the executive engineers or even politicians, they get together and say, we should always stand by the good uses. Hope we are agreed on that. Let us announce once more the 2004 Charter of Peace, and let us say we do it also. All that is very, very good, very nice, hats off. But suppose we, a group of 10 or 20 or 3 or 4, are carrying some hurt, carrying a certain sense of revenge, carrying a sense of sharp division with respect to some other country or community. When some situation triggers or provokes, something goes wrong, these tables and charters will all go to winds. I will not be acting by those charters of peace. We will be acting from that hurt psyche, that wounded ego, that revengeful inner center. When one sees the stupidity of attachment or aversion that has been stored in one's heart, there is a change. We talk of piling of nuclear weapons, and magazines like Time and Newsweek, etc., often have pictures and statistics and very graphical descriptions, and you and I read them, but not many talk about the piling of hurt in the hearts of presidents and prime ministers, senators and councillors. Time magazine does not give, and perhaps cannot give, pictures of which senators, which president, which advisor has so much of piling of anti this country or that country, anti this community or that community, anti this religion or that religion feelings. If they give those statistics, of course, they will be in a little bit of trouble also. That would be like going into the privacy. But it is not an external removal. It is primarily an internal removal. Politicians, statesmen, and you and I, we are all into it on different levels, need to look within and see that center in us. And that center can be burnt. What is burnt? That center is burnt. That ground is free from either revenge or an obligation. On one hand, I could say, moment I look at you, I could say, I need to teach you a lesson. That is one thing. It rises. Another is, I see you and say, I owe you a lot. I am indebted to you, rising from memory. The spiritual classics would ask us for a relation based on love, which is neither revenge nor obligation. In oneness, think about it, is there any obligation? Of course, this may be too hard for most people to conceive, but in absolute oneness, in a spirit of great togetherness, don't we at least feel, we may not do it, when we have sometimes a great rapport, when let us say you and I have such great love, which is rare to find in life, agreed, but when rarely it comes, we feel like burning away our account books. Suppose I owe you $5,000 or you owe me $8,000. In an intensity of friendship, don't we say, hey, we write off, we are one. What is this keeping account? Next day we regret because our ego comes in again. Yesterday I don't know that suddenly I made all those statements. I will clarify today. That was just Christmas Eve, there is a certain mood. But remember, you need to give me back and take a little extra time, no problem. But make the payment, okay? Clarified and back to square one. Then Sri Krishna says that Jnanagni was not bright enough or hot enough. There was only a passing flame. It heated up your sense of separation, and the sense of separation, sense of you are you, I am I, almost got burnt, not fully. The seed was not really roasted. It looked roasted seed, Vedantic example, Bharjita Bija. It looked roasted. But then you sowed the seed, it sprouted again. So what are we in here for? In matter of action, please see, there are details of the situation, the details of the tools we have, and then there are details of the one who has to use the tools. Who is that one? The scientist uses some technology for some selected purpose. Out there is the purpose, and there are a lot of choices. And in the middle there are the tools. Again, there are a lot of tools, varieties of weapons of destruction, let us say, or ways of prosperity. And in here is the scientist himself, scientist herself. And that is taken for granted generally. Just because I am coated, booted, suited, just because I have a degree from some reputed university, I imagine that of course I am a thorough gentleman and the peace of the world is entrusted to me by divine, providence. Many times these politicians have so much in their head, they really believe that providence has placed the fate of humanity in my hands. I am grateful to God and I'll do a good job of it now tomorrow. What buttons are you going to press, sir? Alas, it is not so. That self-importance, that presumptuousness. Now why should I talk always of countries and so on? Take even a relationship between two people. Can we afford to be presumptuous? Can we afford to have some self-importance? Take a second look at all the self-importance that you may have based on your education or income group or height or weight or color or length of the nose or so many things make people feel that they are special. So if you take a second look at the feeling I am special, and equally so if you take a second look at the feeling that I am nobody here, they are all very special people. Somebody wrote to Swami Chinmayananji once, who had written some kind of thank you note to them, maybe for some offering to the organization. Swamiji, we are so honored to get a letter from an extraordinary person like you. And he was very witty, as you know. He wrote back, oh no, I am not extraordinary. I am an extra among the ordinary. He used to play with words. Apart from the humor, there is some great beauty about the state of mind which does not, admit any extraordinariness. I am one among all, and we are organically related. Vimla Thakar, a great writer and speaker, uses this expression. We are organically related not only to other human beings, we are organically related to trees and plants, she says. It's an interesting expression, organic relationship. That means something that goes very deep, the oneness, the sense of oneness. So there is the separative I, there is the hurt, there is the pride, the politician or scientist or any of us. When we are weighed down, we are pulled. When these pride or hurt in our bosom color our perception, right action cannot come forth. One needs to cleanse up one's within. No wonder Sri Krishna says at yet another place, the descriptions look very simple. Right action, with a little liberty of translation, let's call it best action, is described in the 18th chapter, verse 23. Karma satvikam karma. He says, niyatam sangarahitam aragadveshata kritam afala prepsuna karma yattat satvikam uchyate. Sangarahitam, action that is free from personal attachment, selfish attachment, and action that is free from raga and dvesha, pull and push. This comes repeatedly. And action which doesn't hastily think about what is in it for me, what do I gain in that, the calculativeness. Sri Krishna says that is sattvika karma. It appears that there is a sense of don't be attached, don't hate anyone, do your duty. Looks like very simple, but the thrust of our talk today has been, it is not as simple as it looks. Being free from likes and dislikes, being free from the outlook where we say these are my people and those are not mine, etc., becomes the natural perfume of you when on a deeper level you remove certain judgments and certain notions. In other words, not to have likes and dislikes is not the result of an outer resolving, it is the fragrance of an inner transformation. How do we come upon this right action? The tricky thing here is, the intricacy here is, as we have labored quite a bit to show it is an inside-out approach, how do you catch this insight? You cannot catch the inside. You can only undo the habitual tendency to grab the outside. Undo, do and undo. Undo the outside in approach and stay. Stay there. Undo the false, undo the immature. Generally, we are afraid. We have ready access to an ordinary way of coming upon the right action. Refer to this and just do it. That book has said, just do it. Father has said, mother has said, just do it, etc. Now, that brings about a certain mechanicalness in us, because I am here, my father has said something, she is there, her father has said something, he is there, his father has said something. And what if the different fathers have said different things? My holy book says something, your holy book says something else. And what there is, if there is a contradiction? Right? There are limitations. So we see the limitations, we see that things are not as simple as they look, and that intelligent seeing of limitations of ordinary definitions of morality doesn't make you immoral, it makes you more broad-minded. It's a fine balancing act. Please see, I would like to stress this. In no way I mean a non-conformity of that kind where you swing to the opposite, of hating books, of criticizing scriptures, finding fault with all the law books of Christianity or Hinduism or law books of the country, law of the land, as we say. Please, it is not swinging from one extreme to another. It is seeing that this whole matter has limitations, and that is why I call it a balancing act. You stay in such poise and you keep clear of that limited description of morality. You inquire, now what do I do? In that inquiring, in that balanced outlook, there is a different ground in you. There is the ground of being human. The fear we have many times is, if I don't follow a certain picture of what is right, I might become, rebel is not a good enough word. I might become, what's that? Rogue. Yes, that's a better word indeed. I might become a rogue. I might become someone who breaks all the laws and jeopardizes systems and destroys beautiful things. A question was asked once to Krishnamurti. Sir, the questioner said, you no doubt are throwing light on lot of issues, but this way if we approach, there will be a lot of chaos. And Krishnaji very gently asked the questioner, Sir, do you say there is no chaos now? If you seriously think about the way we are living our value systems in families, in the society, in national, international, all levels, can you really say there is no chaos? Do you say there is no disorder? That doesn't mean I am now selling Krishnamurti here or selling some kind of philosophy. Yesterday, while answering a question, I said there is a Zen saying: if ever you come across the Buddha, kill him immediately. So if you meet Krishnamurti, kill him or slap him on the face, and he would be happy for it. If he, and we believe he did, he was passionate about his teachings. For he was the last person for some kind of, saying, I am right, I got it right, now you take it from me. No one can get it right and then hand over to somebody else. Rather, you and I have to arrive at a certain maturity, and in that state of maturity, right action will show forth. Spurana, it is said, shine forth, it will. It is like the discoveries in science, 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration, Edison said, right? So this is not an irresponsible letting go of all values, all notions of right and wrong. Rather, this is what we are talking of is a greater earnestness, a greater passion about finding what is right, in which we are not satisfied with the ordinary descriptions. We perspire, 99% perspiration it is, and we then let go of it. No, I don't know. And you stay in that state of I don't know. There is a humility about it, there is a great openness about it, and then the 1% inspiration takes place. We let go of our impatience, of our restlessness. Tell me what is the right thing. We want to freeze it. We want to package it and do it again and again and again. That way, truth slips from our fingers. For truth is not something that can be frozen. If it could be frozen, certainly we could have distributed it. But truth is so full of life. Truth is life. And since truth is full of life, you have to have a living relationship with it. If it is a lifeless thing like, Taj Mahal or Statue of Liberty, again and again the path is fixed. How do you go and see the Statue of Liberty? Your GPS will show you. Take fly to John F. Kennedy Airport, check in. Your internet sites tell you where to check in at some nearby hotel depending on your purse. And then timings are available, website tells you. There's a rigid path, Of course, somebody going from California has one path, somebody going from Florida has another path, but there are paths to Statue of Liberty. Next time you visit internet for such queries, ask, GPS, way to truth. GPS screen will blow off. No way. Truth street. I need not indulge more. Because truth is a living thing. It's not a dead thing. It is not concrete. It is not cement. It is not metal. Right? Therefore, nobody can give you truth in your hand. But you and I can, in a certain earnestness, see how we have a certain immature, gross outlook towards everything, towards friendship and love and devotion and all our issues of relationship. And because of those immature outlooks, right action again and again slips by, and we have hurt in our heart. Oh no, I don't know. In spite of my best effort, things are going wrong and people misunderstood me, but maybe they are right. I don't know, tell me what you would do in my situation, etc. We become frustrated.